I do think Dennis Schroeder from Atlanta would be a good upgrade. The main real benefit I think you get from him over Ish or really anyone on the roster is his defense. He can really pressure the ball, which would be interesting, in a lineup with Nerlens and eventually Joel Embiid and all that. He gets into the paint a lot like Ish, and he can find shooters and big men rolling the hoop. So he would be a good piece. My concern is that contract. He's in the third year of his rookie contract, so he has, a little over a year and change until he's up for, a new deal. He could be extended next fall. But it's what that contract is going to be. And I think he's going to be in demand, and I'm just not sure he's quite worth it. So while the report package, I think he said Ish, Stauskas, Jakar, and a pick. And which pick that is would obviously be very important. There's no way I see that Lakers pick being included for somebody like that. But in theory, that's more than fair value. You're getting Schroeder for, a decent discount. But my big hesitation would be that contract that he's going to get. I mean, he's going to hit free agency right at the right time when the cap's at $108 million and at its highest point. And I'm just not sure he's a maximum level type player.
I agree with that, but isn't that what's going to happen to some of these guys? And isn't that what the Sixers might have to do to get someone here? Like, basically, hey, we know that you're not worth that kind of money, but we want that young piece at that position, and we're willing to do it. I mean, are they going to have to make that kind of offer to somebody that's maybe not a max player?
No, they will. And there's a lot of teams that are just going to struggle to get to the salary cap floor over the next 2 years. But the question is, do you want to do that at point guard? And there's so much depth at point guard, and there's so many point guard prospects in the draft that it just feels like there could be a better usage of that cap space and of that, real asset in terms of being able to sign people. But I just feel like there's going to be a better opportunity to come that way. I feel like there's going to be a better way to use that cap space at a position that's not quite as easily replaceable. I think you're looking at it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I think maybe how barren the point guard position has been at times over the rebuild, especially since, the trade last year at the deadline. I think maybe that might make us a little more desperate to add a real quality point guard, and I think somebody who has a role in this league. But I just think I'd rather take my chance on a young prospect than that.
Derek,
and more specifically, a prospect who's not about to be maxed out.
Derek Bodner, PhillyMag.com. He covers the 76ers, who proposed deal, as Derek mentioned, was Ish Smith, Nick Stauskas, probably Jakar Sampson. It was an expiring contract, so most people kind of pencil him in there. And then a first-round pick, which, as you mentioned, I think that trade is a good one if it's not that Laker pick, but one of those other two picks. So, now they say they might revisit this deal in the offseason now. Does that make things better for Philadelphia?
Well, I mean, if the only real change that would have is if, that Lakers pick conveys or not. I don't think that really changes things too much. If anything, it gives them, I think one of the hang-ups, or the reported hang-ups at least, on Atlanta's end was the re-signability of Ish Smith. So you could maybe pull that off in a sign-and-trade type of deal. Get a little certainty there from Atlanta's perspective. I mean, to me, it's really whether or not you pencil Schroeder as that max level or close to max level point guard. And I think a lot of that's going to come down to his shooting. He's shown some improvement in the mid-range game this year, which I guess maybe gives you some confidence that he can extend that out. After a real slow start to the season, he has shot better from three-point range of late. So it really comes down to whether or not, he has that defense. He has that ability to get in the paint. Can he be a plus-level shooter at this level? Yeah. And I think whether or not you're willing to give him that kind of contract really depends on that.
Derek, I want to get your opinion on the Okafor proposed deal that Danny Ainge kind of threw out there. Sam Hinkie had kind of said they were not close, on anything. The Ainge kind of indicated that the other team backed out. Would you have made that move? Would it have been a smart move for the 76ers at this juncture of where they are?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it would have been a smart move, but I would have done it. And I'm
surprised to hear that, man.
I'm very, very willing to take a risk, especially when you're talking about players of Simmons and Brandon Ingram's caliber. And that's really what you're making the trade for. So right now the Sixers have about a 45% chance at getting a top two pick, so getting one of those prospects. if you make that deal, that bumps up to about a 65 to 68% chance, depending on where Brooklyn finishes. So you're basically saying, all right, you're heading into the day with a 55% chance of not getting Simmons or Ingram. You're now basically cutting that down in half to where it's a 35, 32% chance of not getting one of those two. To me, I think it's not so much about the probability of that pick working out or of that trade working out, but it's about the probability of getting a high-level talent like those two. And I do think those two are higher-level NBA talents than Okafor. And I do think at some point you have to take a little bit of a risk. And the fact that the Sixers do have Nerlens Noel and Joel Embiid and Dario Saric makes me a little more willing to take that risk. But also, I mean, it's a lot of it's about how you rate Okafor. And I just have so many concerns about his defense, about his rebounding, really about everything other than his individual scoring.
Yeah.
And the Sixers do have that depth, that I'm just more willing to take that risk.
You know, I was there last night. Yeah, go ahead, Derek.
All things being said, that's the kind of trade that gets a GM fired if it doesn't work out. If you trade Okafor for, Chris Dunn or Buddy Hield, so I can understand why somebody else wouldn't be willing to do it. It's not my job on the line.
Well, then I guess the question comes in then, and I was just saying, I was there last night, man. Okafor, he got used last night. I mean, Vucevic just abused him last night. It was sad to watch at points. That was a tough watch for him on the defensive end. But, the question then comes, there has been some talk that they would revisit that deal. If the Brooklyn deal is locked into one or two, does Boston then say, you know what, we're still willing to do that deal because do they value Okafor more than Simmons? And I want to get in him in a minute because I've been someone who's been saying I think by the end of this process, you're going to have people that think Ingram has passed Simmons. Simmons' defense, by the way, he might be worse than Okafor defensively. But would Boston revisit that if it was a one or two? If the lottery's locked in at one or two, do they revisit that in your opinion?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, like I said the last time I was on, we were talking about maybe Nerlens going to Boston. But Boston was looking at Okafor and trying to trade up for Okafor last year at the draft, too. And now they did the same thing at the trade deadline this year. It's pretty clear Danny Ainge values him quite a bit. Now, does he value him over Ben Simmons or Brandon Ingram? That's a great question. Because really, if the lottery comes out and that Brooklyn pick ends up one or two, that takes out a lot of the hesitation that the Sixers may or may not have had. It's hard to say. But I do think it's pretty clear that Danny Ainge values it. And I do think that there's certainly a chance they could revisit that at the time of the draft.
Well, because Boston's in a different spot. They are the one team in the NBA that I think is in a really good position because they have a good team that's just missing that guy, so they are stuck in the middle. But they have that asset. They have that card they can play. So do they feel that Okafor is a more established young player than taking a wild card on maybe a Simmons or an Ingram and having that not work out for them? So I think that's why Boston might consider that, thinking that Okafor is an already established big man that they're lacking.
Yeah, well, not only that, but they also have, that draft pick from the Nets in 2018 and also that pick swap in 2017.
My God, that trade was horrible.
It was incredible. But so even if let's say they acquire Okafor, he doesn't mesh with their team, they can't cover up his defensive abilities, and I think they would give him years down the line to figure this out. But they also have other ways to get there, and it's not tied to their own team's success. They don't have to tank for it. They can really make a playoff push and still have those two really high-level assets in their back pocket. I mean, that trade was incredible. It was just it allows them to do so much more. I mean, we talk about Blake Griffin, and the reason the Sixers can't pursue Blake Griffin is because he's not going to sign here, and you know that. And it would be very difficult to convince him of that in a year and a half where they have him. Well, if Boston goes out and acquires Blake Griffin, they could make the Eastern Conference Finals. And now all of a sudden you still have those assets to trade. You have Blake Griffin. You have an ability to convince him to stay. The Sixers just don't have that. That was highway robbery by Danny Ainge, and that really set themselves up.
Derek Bodner, PhillyMag.com. Many agents and teams, Derek, would like to see the league and the union discuss what to do about that situation that the Sixers kind of, got a raw deal in. They released Jakar Sampson. Now, he's not a cornerstone player by any stretch of the imagination, but a popular guy that the team liked having around. They waived them through no fault of their own. So do you think that the Sixers have egg on their face because of that situation, or is that something the NBA needs to look into?
I mean, I don't think you can really say the Sixers have egg on their face. They really had no control over it. It's not like they were sending out the injured player who failed the physical. They made a move they had to move in order to make a deal go through. I wouldn't expect this to really be resolved, though. I mean, from the players' union perspective, really what I think this comes down to is they want their players, the players who are released as a casualty of trades, to have, basically a 3-day head start to go out and find employment. So if Jakar Sampson gets waived, they want him to get through that waiver process as quickly as possible so he can go find a deal. If you have to wait 72 hours now for the trade to be finalized, that's 72 hours that he's unemployed. So I think that's somewhere where the Players Association is probably going to stand up and be like, look, because this is something that would have to be negotiated into the collective bargaining agreement. Mm-hmm. I think they're probably going to stand up and say, like, no, we don't want to make that concession. And quite frankly, it's a bigger deal for the Players Association because that affects them more often than it affects the team. Because deals in the NBA just don't get, voided very often. So if that impacts a team 1 in 100 chance, that means it's impacting a player 99 out of 100 times. And it's just going to be a bigger issue for the Players Association than it will be for the league and for the teams. So I see the teams caving on that. I would be very surprised if this changes.
Derek, give me your thoughts on Simmons. Everybody just thinks he's the slam dunk guy. I've kind of been saying for a while, if you watch Ingram play, by the end of this process, people might be changing their opinion on that. I'm not saying Simmons is going to be a bust, but he does have some holes. He's terrible defensively, man. He's awful.
Yeah, well, I think LSU doesn't do him any favors. They play a lot of 2-3 zone with him in the middle and him on the tallest guy on the court, and that's just not his game. He's not a weak side shot blocker. He's not a rotation guy. He's a guy that you're going to put on stretch fours, on combo forwards, and basically just ask him to man up one-on-one. So I think in the NBA, his team responsibilities are going to be a lot less than they are at LSU, and maybe some of those weaknesses aren't going to be quite as pronounced. I do think that there's a legitimate discussion between who should go number one, but that's not so much because of anything Ben Simmons is or isn't, but because, I think Brandon Ingram is just a very high-level potential as well. So I think it's a great situation for a team like the Sixers to be in because, as we all know, those ping pong balls are not always kind. So having two, if we're looking at Brandon Ingram against other, quote-unquote second prospects like D'Angelo Russell or Jabari Parker, I think Ingram's a step up. I think you could have two franchise players in this draft, whereas maybe that wasn't the case in the previous 2 years. So I think it's a great spot for a team like the Sixers to be in. I would still take Ben Simmons number one. I mean, a guy who has that kind of feel for the game and that kind of athleticism, it would be very difficult for me to pass on. But I do think Ingram's a potential franchise player as well.
He's Derek Bodner at